The gunshot that killed Ophelia Sterling's father echoed through the canyon like thunder, and she knew in that moment that everything proper about her life had died with him. She stood over his fresh grave 3 days later, dirt under her fingernails from helping dig it herself, because the undertaker had refused to bury a man killed in a saloon brawl, and felt the last threads of her Boston finishing school education unravel in the harsh California sun of Randsburg. It was 1882, and Ophelia had arrived in this God-forsaken mining town exactly 1 week ago, stepping off the stagecoach in her traveling dress with her ridiculous feathered hat, expecting to find her father prosperous and ready to welcome her into a new life. Instead, she found him bleeding out on a saloon floor, a bullet in his chest from a card game gone wrong. The man who shot him had already fled into the desert, and the sheriff seemed less interested in justice than in getting back to his whiskey. Now she stood in front of the mining claim office, a rolled piece of paper in her hand that declared her the owner of the Silver Rose mine, worth absolutely nothing according to every man in town who had bothered to give her an opinion. The clerk behind the desk was a rail-thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose. "Miss Sterling, I really must advise you to sell," he said for the third time. "A woman alone cannot possibly operate a mine. It simply is not done." "Then I suppose I will be the first to do it," Ophelia said, signing her name with a flourish. Her hand was steadier than she felt. "You do not understand the difficulties. The physical labor, the rough men, the danger. I understand perfectly that my father died believing that mine held silver, and I intend to find out if he was right." She straightened her shoulders, though the black mourning dress hung loose on her frame. She had lost weight in the past week, unable to stomach the questionable food at the boarding house. The clerk sighed and stamped the papers. "On your own head be it, miss. Though I expect you will be back here within a month begging someone to take it off your hands." Ophelia walked out into the dusty street, squinting against the afternoon sun. Randsburg sprawled across the Mojave Desert like a wound in the earth, all raw wood buildings and canvas tents, filled with miners and opportunists chasing dreams of wealth. The air tasted of alkali and desperation. She had never felt more out of place or more determined to stay. She made her way to the general store, her boots already coated in the reddish dust that seemed to cover everything. Inside, the proprietor's wife looked up from her sewing with an expression that managed to be both pitying and disapproving. "Miss Sterling," Mrs. Hayes said, setting down her needle, "I heard about your father. Terrible tragedy." "Thank you," Ophelia said stiffly. "I need supplies." "Mining equipment." Mrs. Hayes's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Mining equipment. Surely you are not serious about working that claim." "I am entirely serious. But you are a lady, or at least you were raised as one from what I understand. Boston, was it?" "Boston does not matter anymore," Ophelia said, and surprised herself with how true that felt. The girl who had learned to pour tea and play piano and make polite conversation about nothing seemed like a stranger now. "I need a pickaxe, a shovel, rope, lanterns, and whatever else you think necessary." Mrs. Hayes pursed her lips. "I think a husband necessary, Miss Sterling. There are plenty of lonely men in this town who would be happy to. I do not want a husband. I want mining supplies." The bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in, tall enough that he had to duck slightly under the doorframe. Ophelia noticed his presence the way one notices a shift in weather, that awareness of something substantial entering a space. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and eyes that were an unusual shade of amber. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with the kind of lean strength that came from years of hard work. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice low and easy. Then his gaze moved to Ophelia, and she felt it like a physical thing, assessing and curious. "Madam." "Owen," Mrs. Hayes said, her tone warming considerably. "This is Miss Ophelia Sterling. She just inherited her father's claim." "The silver rose," he said, and it was not a question. "I heard about your father. I am sorry for your loss." There was something genuine in his voice that made Ophelia's throat tighten unexpectedly. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Miss Sterling was just telling me she intends to work the mine herself, Mrs. Hayes said, and there was an edge to her words, an invitation for this man to join in the chorus of disapproval. But Owen just looked at Ophelia with those strange amber eyes and said, "That is a hard claim. Your father worked it for 2 years without much to show. So everyone keeps telling me." Ophelia lifted her chin. "But I have nothing else, and I am not going to sell it for pennies just because I am a woman." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of what might have been respect. "Fair enough. You know anything about mining? Not a thing," she admitted, "but I can learn." "Learning by yourself is a good way to get hurt or killed." He paused, seeming to consider something. "I have a claim about a mile from yours. Been working it for 3 years. I could show you the basics if you want. How to shore up a shaft, what to look for, how not to bring the whole thing down on your head." "Why would you do that?" Ophelia asked, suspicious. In her experience, men did not offer help without expecting something in return. "Because your father was a decent man, even if he was not a lucky one," Owen said simply. "And because watching you die in a cave-in would sit poorly with me." Mrs. Hayes looked scandalized. "Owen O'Brien, you cannot possibly be suggesting that you spend time alone with an unmarried woman." Her reputation is already in tatters just by being here," Ophelia interrupted. "A proper lady would have taken the first stage coach back to Boston, but I am discovering that I do not care much about being proper anymore." Owen's mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile. "I will meet you at the Silver Rose tomorrow morning then. Sunup. Bring water and a hat with a wider brim than that bit of nonsense you are wearing. Desert sun will cook your brain." He tipped his hat and left before she could respond, and Ophelia found herself staring at the door he had walked through, a strange flutter in her chest that she firmly told herself was just nervousness about the mine. Mrs. Hayes clucked her tongue. "That boy is going to cause you trouble, Miss Sterling. Mark my words." "Everything about my life is trouble now," Ophelia said. "What is one more thing?" She bought her supplies, arranged for them to be delivered to the mine, and walked back to the boarding house as the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that were almost beautiful if you could ignore the desolation beneath the colors. In her small rented room, she took off her morning dress and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. Her dark hair was coming loose from its pins, her face was sunburned, and her green eyes looked too large in her thin face. "I will never be a proper lady," she said to her reflection, testing the words. They felt true and terrifying and somehow liberating all at once. She lay awake most of the night, listening to the sounds of the town, the distant piano from the saloon where her father had died, the occasional shout or burst of laughter, the absolute silence of the desert beyond. By the time dawn broke, she had gotten perhaps 2 hours of sleep, but she was dressed in her plainest dress and the wide-brimmed hat she had purchased, standing outside the Silver Rose mine as the sun crept over the horizon. Owen arrived on horseback, leading a second horse behind him. "Thought you might need a way to get out here regular," he said, dismounting. "You can borrow Daisy until you get your own mount." The mare was a placid brown creature who regarded Ophelia with gentle eyes. "I do not know how to ride," Ophelia admitted. "Add it to the list of things to learn," Owen said. But walking out here every day will kill you in the summer heat. It is not far, so I will walk you through it." He did, with a patience that surprised her, showing her how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to sit. His hands were calloused when they steadied her boot in the stirrup, and he smelled of leather and something clean, like sage. Ophelia found herself acutely aware of his nearness, which was ridiculous considering everything else she had to worry about. The Silver Rose was a hole in the side of a rocky outcrop, shored up with timber that looked disturbingly precarious. Owen lit a lantern and led her inside, and Ophelia felt the weight of the earth close around her like a fist. The air was cool and damp and tasted of minerals. "Your father dug about 60 feet in," Owen said, his voice echoing slightly. "He was following a quartz vein, see there." He held up the lantern, and Ophelia could make out a whitish streak running through the darker rock. "Silver often runs alongside quartz. Problem is, he did not have the equipment to dig deep enough or the knowledge to follow it properly." "Do you think there is silver here?" Ophelia asked. Owen was quiet for a moment, studying the rock face. "Maybe. I have seen promising signs in worse places. But even if there is, getting it out takes time and money and backbreaking work. Most claims play out with nothing to show." "But some do not," Ophelia said. "Some do not," he agreed. He looked at her in the lantern light, his face half in shadow. "Why are you really doing this? You could sell the claim, take what little money you get and go back east. Start over somewhere easier." Ophelia touched the rough rock wall, feeling the cool stone against her palm. "Because I have nothing to go back to. My mother died when I was 12, and my father sent me to school and then to live with his sister, who made it very clear I was an obligation she could barely tolerate. When my father wrote and said he had made his fortune and wanted me to come west, I thought finally I would have a home again. But he did not make his fortune, and now he is dead, and this mine is all I have of him. So yes, maybe it is foolish, but I am going to try." Owen nodded slowly. "All right then. I will teach you what I know, but you have to promise me something." "What?" "That you will be careful. That you will not take stupid risks. Mining is dangerous work, Miss Sterling, and it is even more dangerous if you are reckless." "I promise," Ophelia said. "And you can call me Ophelia. I think we are past formalities if you are going to be teaching me how to blow up rocks." That almost smile crossed his face again. "We are not starting with blasting powder. That is a good way to lose fingers. We are starting with the absolute basics." And he did. Over the following days, Owen taught her how to swing a pickaxe without throwing out her back, how to tell stable rock from unstable, how to set supports, how to use a miner's candle to test for bad air. Her hands blistered and then calloused. Her muscles screamed in protest every morning until gradually they stopped. She learned to ride Daisy without feeling like she was going to fall off at every step. She learned to drink her coffee black and her water carefully rationed. She also learned about Owen, in small pieces offered in the quiet hours underground or during the brief rests they took in the shade of the outcrop. He had come west from Missouri 5 years ago, running from a life he did not want to talk about. He had worked cattle drives and railroad crews before settling in Randsburg to try his luck mining. He had a brother somewhere in Colorado who he had not seen in 3 years. He could read, but had little formal education. He loved the desert in a way that seemed incomprehensible to Ophelia, but that she was starting to almost understand. The way the emptiness felt like freedom rather than desolation. 2 weeks into her mining education, they broke through to a new section of the vein, and Ophelia watched as Owen chipped away at the rock, revealing a glitter of something that caught the lamplight. "Is that silver?" she breathed. Owen studied it carefully, then used his knife to scrape at the deposit. "It is not a rich vein, but it is real." He looked at her, and his eyes were bright with something that might have been pride. "Your father was right. There is silver here." Ophelia felt tears prick her eyes, surprising herself. He was not crazy then, he was not just chasing nothing. "No," Owen said softly, "he was not." She wiped at her face, embarrassed by the emotion. "I am sorry, I am being foolish." "You are being human," Owen said. He reached out and very gently brushed a smudge of rock dust from her cheek. His hand lingered for just a moment, warm against her skin, and Ophelia's breath caught. Their eyes met in the lamplight, and she saw something in his gaze that made her heart hammer against her ribs. Then Owen stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get samples assayed, see what the quality is like. I know a man in town who is honest about it, more or less." The moment broke, but it left something trembling in the air between them, unspoken and dangerous. They rode back to town together in the golden light of late afternoon, and Ophelia was startled to realize that she was almost happy. Exhausted and filthy and so far from the life she had been raised for that it seemed like a distant dream, but happy nonetheless. When they reached the boarding house, Owen helped her down from the horse, his hand steady on her waist, and she found herself reluctant to step away. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. You did not have to do any of this." "I know," Owen said. He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and less guarded. "But I wanted to." He rode off before she could ask what he meant, and Ophelia stood in the street watching him go, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. At dinner that night in the boarding house dining room, she was approached by a man she had seen around town but never spoken to. He was perhaps 40, well-dressed by Randsburg standards, with slicked back hair and a calculating look in his eyes. "Miss Sterling," he said, removing his hat. "I am Cyrus Fletcher. I own the stamp mill outside town. I heard you have been working your father's claim." "News travels fast," Ophelia said neutrally. "In a town this size, everything travels fast." He smiled, showing too many teeth. "I also heard you might have found some color. I wanted to make you an offer. I will buy the silver rose from you for $500. That is more than fair for an unproven claim." "It is proven now," Ophelia said. "We found silver. Traces, maybe. But extracting it, processing it, that takes equipment and expertise you do not have. Sell to me and you walk away with cash in hand and no more worry." "I am not interested in selling, Mr. Fletcher." His smile thinned. "Miss Sterling, you are a young woman alone. This is no life for you. Take the money, go back east, find a husband. Let the mining be done by men who know what they are doing." "No," Ophelia said firmly. She stood up, meeting his eyes. "I am not selling, not to you, not to anyone." Fletcher's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake. This town is not kind to women who do not know their place." "Then I suppose I will have to teach it to be kinder," Ophelia said, and walked away, her hands shaking slightly with anger and adrenaline. She was not surprised when, 3 days later, she arrived at the Silver Rose to find that someone had partially collapsed the entrance with what looked like deliberate damage to the support timbers. Owen arrived minutes after she did, took one look at the damage, and his face went dark with fury. "Fletcher," he said flatly, "you think he did this. I know he did. He has been buying up claims for pennies, especially from anyone he can intimidate. He tried it with me when I first staked my claim. When I refused to sell, I had 2 months of trouble. Equipment stolen, my camp vandalized, even had someone take shots at me one night. What did you do?" "I sat outside his office with my rifle across my knees for 6 hours until he came out to talk to me. I explained very clearly that if anything else happened to my claim, I would assume he was responsible and I would respond accordingly. The trouble stopped." "I cannot exactly do that," Ophelia said. "I do not even own a rifle." "You should," Owen said. Out here, you need to be able to protect yourself." He studied the collapsed entrance. "This is fixable, but it is going to take time, and Fletcher is not going to stop just because you refuse to sell. What do you suggest?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful, as if he was testing the words. "We could partner up, combine our claims, work them together. Two people are harder to intimidate than one, and we would have more resources to actually get the silver out." "Is that really what you want?" Ophelia asked. "Or are you just trying to protect me?" "Both," Owen admitted. He turned to look at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that she had not seen before. "I like working with you, Ophelia. You are smart, and you are not afraid of hard work, and you do not give up even when you probably should. And yes, I want to keep you safe, because the thought of Fletcher or anyone else hurting you makes me want to do violence. But mostly I want to keep working with you because these past few weeks have been the best I have had since I came to California." Ophelia's heart was beating very fast. "I like working with you too," she said quietly. "More than like, if I am being honest." Owen took a step closer. "Ophelia, wait," she said, holding up a hand. "Before you say anything else, you should know something. I will never be a proper lady. I think I proved that when I chose to stay here and dig in the dirt instead of going back to Boston and finding some respectable man to marry. I am too stubborn and too independent, and I do not know how to be the kind of woman who makes a good wife by society's standards." Owen looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled, slow and genuine and breathtaking. "Then be my improper wife instead." Ophelia blinked. "What?" "Marry me," Owen said. "Not because it is proper or expected, but because I think we could build something good together. The mind's a life, something real. I have been half in love with you since you told Mrs. Hayes you did not care about being proper. And I have been completely in love with you since you cried when we found silver, because it meant your father was not crazy. Marry me, and we will work the claims together and fight off Fletcher together and make a life out here that is ours and no one else's." "You barely know me," Ophelia whispered, but her heart was soaring. "I know enough," Owen said. "I know you are brave and loyal and fierce. I know you have a good heart and a strong back, and you do not quit. I know that I think about you when I am working my own claim, that I look forward to seeing you every morning more than I have ever looked forward to anything. I know that when I imagine my future, you are in it. That is enough for me. The question is it enough for you?" Ophelia thought about Boston, about the life she was supposed to have lived, full of tea parties and careful manners and slow suffocation. Then she thought about the past few weeks, the freedom of the desert, the satisfaction of hard work, the way her heart lifted every time she saw Owen ride up on his horse. She thought about the future they could build, unconventional and difficult and real. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Owen's face split into a grin, and then he was kissing her, his hands cupping her face, and Ophelia kissed him back with all the passion and relief and joy flooding through her. He tasted of dust and coffee and something indefinably him, and she felt like she was finally home. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably go tell people, make it official. We should probably fix the mine entrance first," Ophelia said practically, but she was smiling. "We can get married and fight Fletcher at the same time." "Now that," Owen said, "sounds like the kind of marriage I want." They worked the rest of the day clearing the entrance and repairing the damage, and by sunset they had it secured again. They rode back to town together, and Owen insisted on going straight to the boarding house to speak to Mrs. Reynolds, the proprietor, about making the engagement public and proper, or at least as proper as anything in their situation could be. Mrs. Reynolds, a pragmatic woman who had seen everything in her years running the boarding house, raised an eyebrow but congratulated them. "I suppose it makes sense," she said. "You have been spending every day together anyway. At least this makes it respectable." "When is the wedding?" "As soon as possible," Owen said. "No point in waiting." They were married 4 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Randsburg. The ceremony was held in the small church, witnessed by a handful of townspeople, including Mrs. Hayes, who looked like she could not decide whether to be scandalized or approving, and a few of the miners who worked claims near theirs. Ophelia wore a simple blue dress, the best she owned, and Owen had cleaned up remarkably well in a proper suit coat that he claimed to have borrowed, but that fit him suspiciously well. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with an enthusiasm that made several people chuckle, and Ophelia felt happiness bubble up inside her like silver ore struck by lamplight, bright and precious and real. The wedding breakfast was held at the boarding house, and it was there that Cyrus Fletcher made his appearance, uninvited and unwelcome. He stood in the doorway looking at the gathered crowd with a sour expression. "So the rumors are true," he said. "The Sterling girl married the drifter." "How touching." Owen's hand tightened on Ophelia's, but his voice was calm when he spoke. "You are not invited, Fletcher. Leave." "I just wanted to congratulate the happy couple," Fletcher said, his tone making a mockery of the words. "And to let you know that combining your worthless claims does not make them any less worthless. When you are ready to admit defeat, my offer still stands, though it might be lower now that you have a wife to support, O'Brien." "We will never sell to you," Ophelia said clearly. "And if you damage our property again, we will go to the sheriff," Fletcher laughed. "The sheriff does not care about a collapsed timber or two. Accidents happen in mining all the time." His smile was cold. "All sorts of accidents." "You threatening my wife on our wedding day is a poor choice," Owen said, and there was something dangerous in his voice that made Fletcher's smile falter slightly. "Not a threat, just a statement of fact." Fletcher tipped his hat mockingly. "Enjoy your marriage while it lasts." He left, and the mood of the celebration was dampened, but Owen squeezed Ophelia's hand and said quietly, "We will not let him ruin this day. We are stronger than he thinks." They spent their wedding night in the small room Owen had been renting above the saloon, and Ophelia discovered that the passion between them was as fierce and honest as everything else in their relationship. In the darkness, with Owen's arms around her, she felt safer and more certain of her choices than she ever had in her carefully controlled Boston life. The next morning, they moved Ophelia's few belongings out of the boarding house and into Owen's room, and then they rode out to the claims together as the sun rose over the desert. They spent the day working the Silver Rose, and by evening they had enough ore extracted to take to the assayer. The results came back 3 days later, and they were better than expected. The silver content was high enough to be profitable, assuming they could extract it in sufficient quantities. With careful work, the mine could provide a decent living, maybe more. "We need to register the partnership officially," Owen said, studying the assay report. "Make it clear that we own both claims jointly. That way Fletcher cannot try to manipulate anything if something happens to one of us." They filed the papers the next day, and Ophelia signed her name Ophelia Sterling O'Brien with a flourish, loving the way it looked on the page. They also used some of their limited funds to buy proper mining equipment, including a small ore cart and better tools. Owen taught her how to shoot with his rifle, spending hours in the desert practicing until she could hit targets with reasonable accuracy. "I do not like guns," Ophelia said after one practice session, her shoulder aching from the recoil. "Neither do I," Owen admitted. "But we need to be able to protect ourselves and our property. Fletcher is not going to stop, and the law out here is thin as paper." He was right. Over the next few weeks, they dealt with more sabotage. Equipment went missing. Their ore samples were stolen from outside the assayer's office. Someone started a rumor in town that the Silver Rose was cursed, that Ophelia's father had died because he dug too greedily, and that the mine would claim the lives of anyone who worked it. Through it all, they kept working. They established a routine, rising before dawn to work the mine during the cooler morning hours, breaking during the worst heat of midday, working again in the evening. They took turns cooking meals over the small fire outside the mine entrance. Simple food, but satisfying when you were hungry enough. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories and dreams. Owen told her about growing up on a failing farm in Missouri, about the brother he had fought with and still missed, about his dream of one day owning a real ranch with cattle and horses. Ophelia told him about her lonely childhood, about losing her mother, about the suffocating expectations of Boston society. "You ever miss it?" Owen asked one evening as they sat watching the sun set, painting the desert in impossible colors. "The comfort, the ease of that life." Ophelia leaned against him, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Sometimes I miss having clean fingernails and not being perpetually covered in dust," she admitted. "But I do not miss the life. I was so lonely there, Owen." I smiled and made polite conversation and went to church and did all the right things, but I was dying inside bit by bit. Out here I am alive. Tired and dirty and sometimes scared, but alive. Owen kissed the top of her head. "Good, because I cannot imagine doing this without you anymore." 2 months after their wedding, they hit a rich pocket of ore, a vein that ran thick with silver and seemed to keep going deeper into the rock. They worked 12-hour days extracting it, their hands raw and their backs aching, but the pile of high-grade ore grew steadily. When they finally took it to be processed at Fletcher's stamp mill, because it was the only one in reasonable distance, Fletcher himself oversaw the work with a sour expression. "Lucky strike," he said, watching the machinery crush and process the ore. "But it will play out soon enough." "They always do." "Maybe," Owen said mildly. "Or maybe we are just getting started." The silver from that haul brought them more money than Ophelia had seen since her father died. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to pay their debts, restock their supplies, and still have something left over. Owen bought a small piece of land on the outskirts of Randsburg, flat ground with a good well. "What is this for?" Ophelia asked, standing on the empty land. "For building a house," Owen said. "A real one, not just a rented room, somewhere that is ours." He looked at her and there was vulnerability in his eyes. "If you want to, that is, we could stay in town if you prefer." "I want to," Ophelia said immediately. "I want a home with you, a real home." They spent the next months dividing their time between working the mine and building the house, doing most of the work themselves with occasional help from a few friendly miners. It was hard, exhausting work, but there was something deeply satisfying about seeing the structure rise from the ground, walls and roof and windows that would be theirs. Ophelia learned carpentry alongside mining, learned to measure and cut and nail, and she took fierce pride in every board she helped place. Fletcher continued to make trouble where he could, but as the Silver Rose continued to produce and word got around about the quality of the ore, his influence seemed to wane. Other miners who had sold to him cheaply began to resent it, and Fletcher's reputation suffered. He made one more direct attempt at intimidation, riding out to the mine with 2 hired men and demanding that Owen and Ophelia sell. Owen met them with his rifle and Ophelia stood beside him with hers. "You need to leave," Owen said calmly. "Now." Fletcher's face was red with anger. "You think you can threaten me? I own half this town." "And we own this mine," Ophelia said. "Every legal claim and filing is in order. You have no right to be here, and if you do not leave immediately, I will consider it trespassing and defend my property accordingly." One of Fletcher's hired men shifted nervously. "Boss, maybe we should shut up," Fletcher snapped. He glared at Owen and Ophelia. "You two have no idea what you are messing with. I will ruin you." "You can try," Owen said, "but we are not going anywhere and we are not selling. So you have a choice. You can accept that and move on, or you can keep pushing and see where that gets you. But I promise you, Fletcher, if you hurt my wife or damage our property again, there will be consequences." There was steel in Owen's voice, and Fletcher must have heard it because he yanked his horse around and rode off, his men following. They did not come back after that, though Fletcher continued to make their lives difficult in smaller ways whenever he could. By the time winter came, the house was finished. It was small and simple, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and well built, and it was theirs. They moved in on a cold December day, carrying their few possessions, and that night they sat in front of the fireplace Owen had built with his own hands and marveled at the fact that they had made this life, this home. "I love you," Ophelia said, the words spilling out naturally. She had said them before in moments of passion or tenderness, but this felt different, more fundamental. "I love you so much." Owen pulled her close, his arms strong and warm around her. "I love you too. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Ophelia. Everything good in my life started when you walked into that general store looking so determined and lost at the same time." "I was terrified," Ophelia admitted. "I had no idea what I was doing." "You still do not, most of the time," Owen teased gently. "But you do it anyway, and that is what matters." The winter was cold, colder than Ophelia had expected in the desert, but the house stayed warm and they kept working the mine when weather permitted. In January, Ophelia realized she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction, unsure if a baby was something they were ready for. Owen's face went through about 6 different emotions before settling on something like awe. "A baby! We are having a baby." "Yes," Ophelia said. "I think I am about 2 months along. Are you happy?" "Happy." Owen swept her up in a careful hug, laughing. "Ophelia, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled, and I cannot believe we are going to have a child." "Neither can I," Ophelia admitted. "I have no idea how to be a mother." "And I have no idea how to be a father," Owen said. "So I suppose we will figure it out together, like we figure out everything else." They did. Ophelia continued working the mine through her pregnancy, though Owen became increasingly protective and worried, constantly trying to get her to rest more. She finally agreed to stop going into the mine itself in her 6th month, but she still helped process ore and manage supplies and handle the business side of their operation. Their son was born in late August of 1883, a hot day when the desert felt like an oven and Ophelia was certain she was going to die. But she did not die, and when the midwife placed the squalling infant in her arms, she felt a wave of love so intense it was almost frightening. Owen held them both, his eyes wet with tears, and whispered, "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." They named him Oliver, and he had Owen's amber eyes and Ophelia's dark hair, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. Mrs. Reynolds from the boarding house came out to help for the first week, showing Ophelia how to nurse and care for the baby. And for the first time since arriving in Randsburg, Ophelia felt the support of other women around her. Several of the miners' wives brought food and baby clothes, and Mrs. Hayes even apologized for her initial disapproval. "You proved me wrong," she said, holding baby Oliver with experienced hands. I did not think a Boston lady could make it out here, but you have done more than make it. You have thrived. Your father would be proud." The words meant more than Ophelia expected, and she found herself crying, which she blamed on exhaustion and the strange emotional state that came with new motherhood. But really, it was gratitude for the life she had built, for the man she had married, for the child in her arms. Owen was a wonderful father, patient and gentle and completely besotted with his son. He would sit for hours just watching Oliver sleep, or walk him around the house when he was fussy, talking to him in a low, soothing voice about mining and horses and the desert. Ophelia would watch them together and feel her heart expand with a love she had not known was possible. The Silver Rose continued to produce steadily through 1883 and into 1884. They hired a few men to help with the heavier work, good men who Owen trusted and who treated Ophelia with respect. The mine became one of the more successful operations in the area, not wildly rich but profitable and reliable. They expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms for the growing family they both wanted. Fletcher's fortunes, meanwhile, declined. Several of his claims played out, and his reputation for bullying and cheating finally caught up with him. When the railroad extended a line closer to Randsburg and a competing stamp mill opened, his monopoly broke. By 1885, he had sold most of his holdings and left California entirely, and no one in Randsburg mourned his departure. Ophelia and Owen's second child, a daughter they named Eliza, was born in the spring of 1886. She had Owen's smile and Ophelia's green eyes, and Oliver was fascinated by her, wanting to help with everything. Their house rang with the sounds of children, and Ophelia often paused in whatever she was doing to marvel at how different her life was from what she had imagined as a girl in Boston. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Owen took her back to the Silver Rose. They had not been inside the mine in months, having left the day-to-day operations to their hired crew. The vein was still producing, but more slowly, as they had known it eventually would. "I want to show you something," Owen said, leading her deep into the mine with a lantern. They walked past the worked areas to a section they had been excavating slowly over the past year. Owen held up the lantern, and Ophelia gasped. The rock face glittered with silver, a thick vein that looked like it ran deep into the mountain. "We found this about 6 months ago," Owen said. "I did not say anything because I wanted to be sure it was real and substantial, but it is, Ophelia. This could be enough to set us up for life, to make sure our children never have to worry." Ophelia stared at the silver, but instead of excitement, she felt a strange sort of peace. "You know what is funny?" she said. 5 years ago, I needed this desperately. I needed the mine to produce because it was all I had. But now, I do not need it anymore. I have you, I have our children, I have a home and a life I love. The silver is wonderful, but it is not what matters." Owen set down the lantern and pulled her close. "That is because you are wise as well as beautiful," he said. "But I am still glad it is here. It means we can be comfortable, that we can make choices based on what we want rather than what we need. Maybe we can even buy that ranch I used to dream about." "A ranch," Ophelia said, surprised. "You still want that?" "I want whatever makes you happy," Owen said. "If you want to keep mining, we mine. If you want to ranch, we ranch. If you want to move to San Francisco and open a bakery, we will do that too," Ophelia laughed. "I do not know the first thing about baking. But a ranch might be nice. Space for the children to grow, animals, something a little less likely to collapse on our heads." "Then we will make it happen," Owen said, and kissed her there in the lamplight, surrounded by silver and stone and the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. They worked the new vein carefully over the next 2 years, and it produced even better than Owen had hoped. By 1888, they had enough money to buy a substantial piece of land, 30 miles from Randsburg, good grazing land with water and grass. They sold the silver rose to a mining company from San Francisco for a fair price, keeping a small percentage of future profits, and moved to the ranch with their children and high hopes. The transition was easier than Ophelia expected, partly because ranching turned out to be just as much hard work as mining, only with different challenges. Owen had experience with cattle from his youth, and Ophelia proved to have an unexpected talent for managing the business side of the operation. They built a larger house, a real ranch house with a wide porch and room for the family they continued to grow. Their third child, a son named Oscar, was born in 1889, followed by another daughter, Emily, in 1891. The house was always full of noise and chaos and love, children running everywhere, ranch hands coming and going, the constant work of managing livestock and land. It was exhausting and wonderful, and nothing like the life Ophelia had been raised to expect. On a warm evening in the spring of 1892, 10 years after she had arrived in Randsburg, Ophelia sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sun set over the grassland. Oliver was 14 now, tall and serious, helping Owen with the horses. Eliza was 6, Emily just over a year, and Oscar was entertaining both his younger sisters with exaggerated stories. Inside, dinner was cooking, filling the air with savory smells. Owen came up the porch steps and sat beside her, taking her hand in his. His hands were still calloused from work, but now they were ranch calluses instead of mining calluses. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Ophelia said. "How strange life is, how unpredictable. If my father had not sent for me, if he had not died, if I had made different choices, I would be someone completely different right now." "Do you regret it?" Owen asked. "Any of it?" Ophelia looked at her husband, at the silver starting to thread through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes from years of squinting at the desert sun, at the way he looked at her like she was still the most amazing thing he had ever seen. She looked at her children, healthy and happy and free in a way she had never been as a child. She looked at the land stretching out around them, harsh and beautiful and theirs. "I do not regret a single moment," she said. "I told you once that I would never be a proper lady. I was right about that. But you made me an improper wife and an improper mother and an improper rancher, and I love every bit of it. This life, this strange, difficult, wonderful life is exactly what I was meant to have." Owen kissed her hand. "You are the most proper person I know," he said. "Because you are exactly who you are supposed to be without apology or pretense. That is the most proper thing there is." "You are being philosophical," Ophelia teased. "That is my job." "Then I am being an improper husband," Owen said with a grin. "I learned from the best." They sat together as the sun finished setting, their children's laughter filling the air, and Ophelia felt complete in a way she had not known was possible. She had lost so much when she came west, her father, her old life, her expectations of who she would be. But she had gained infinitely more. She had gained herself, had discovered who she truly was beneath all the layers of propriety and expectation. She had gained love, real and fierce and honest. She had gained a family, a home, a purpose. The years continued to pass in the way they do, bringing both joy and sorrow. Owen's brother finally came to visit in 1894, bringing his own family, and the two men reconciled the old hurts between them. Ophelia's aunt in Boston wrote occasionally, and though they would never be close, there was a tentative peace between them. The ranch prospered, growing from a modest operation to one of the more successful spreads in the region. The children grew. Oliver eventually taking over much of the day-to-day ranch management, Eliza showing a talent for horses that rivaled her father's, Oscar proving to be the family scholar with a love of books and learning, Emily inheriting her mother's stubborn determination. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902, Owen and Ophelia traveled back to Randsburg for the first time in years. The town had changed, grown more settled and respectable, the wildness of the early mining days fading into something more permanent. The Silver Rose was still producing, though the company that owned it now had professional miners and modern equipment. They visited the small house they had built, now owned by a young family starting their own mining operation. "It seems smaller than I remember," Ophelia said, standing outside the house. "We were smaller then too," Owen said. "In a lot of ways." They rode out to the mine, now fenced and posted with the company name. They could not go inside, but they stood looking at the entrance, remembering. "Do you ever miss it?" Ophelia asked. "The mining, the simplicity of those early days," Owen thought about it. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I do not want to go back. Those days were important, they made us who we are, but I like who we have become. I like our life, our family, our ranch. I like being 50 years old and still in love with my improper wife." "Only 50, Ophelia teased. She was 42 now, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of sun and laughter. "You are practically ancient. And you are still as stubborn and beautiful as the day I met you," Owen said, pulling her close. "Maybe more so." They left Randsburg the next day and rode home to the ranch, to their children and grandchildren, because Oliver had married a year before and had a baby daughter who looked disturbingly like Ophelia herself. They settled back into the rhythm of ranch life, the work and the love and the long, comfortable silences that came from decades of partnership. When Owen was 60 and Ophelia 52, they finally hired enough hands to step back from the hardest physical work. They spent more time on the porch, watching sunsets, playing with grandchildren, talking about everything and nothing. Owen's hair was completely silver now, and Ophelia's was going the same way, but they still held hands like newlyweds, still found moments to kiss when they thought no one was watching, still made each other laugh with private jokes accumulated over decades. "We did all right, didn't we?" Owen said one evening, their youngest grandchild asleep on his lap. "Better than all right," Ophelia said. "We did wonderfully. Against all odds and expectations, we built something real and lasting. We loved each other, we raised good children, we made a life that mattered." "And all because you decided you would never be a proper lady," Owen said with a smile. "And you decided you wanted an improper wife," Ophelia replied. "Best decision either of us ever made." "Second best," Owen corrected. "The best decision was not giving up, not on the mine, not on each other, not on this life. We could have quit 100 times, sold out, taken the easier path. But we did not. We stayed, we fought, we built. That was the real decision, the one we made every day." Ophelia leaned her head on his shoulder, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. "You are right," she said softly. "And I would make that decision again every single day for the rest of my life." They sat together as the stars came out over the grassland, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had created, the love that had sustained them through everything. And Ophelia thought about the frightened girl she had been 38 years ago, standing over her father's grave with dirt under her fingernails, and she wished she could tell that girl that everything would be all right, more than all right. That the life ahead, improper and unexpected and perfect in its imperfection, would be better than any dream she could have imagined. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and grass, and somewhere in the house one of the children was singing a lullaby to a baby. Owen's arm was warm around her shoulders, his breathing steady and familiar, and Ophelia Sterling O'Brien felt the kind of contentment that only comes from a life fully lived, from choices made with courage, from love given and received without reservation. She had never become a proper lady, it was true, but she had become something far better. She had become herself, fully and completely, and she had found someone who loved her not despite her impropriety but because of it. She had built a family, a home, a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. She had lived a life of purpose and passion and profound, enduring love. And really, she thought as Owen kissed the top of her head and the baby in his lap stirred and settled again, what more could anyone ask for than that? What greater success could there be than to look back on decades of marriage and see nothing but love and partnership and shared joy? What better legacy than children and grandchildren who were happy and whole and free to be themselves? The answer, she knew, was nothing. There was nothing more, nothing better. This life, improper and unconventional and absolutely perfect, was everything she had never known she wanted and everything she would ever need. And as she sat there under the stars with her husband of 38 years, surrounded by the evidence of their love and labor, Ophelia was completely, utterly, profoundly happy. She had made her choice all those years ago in a dusty mining town, had chosen to stay and fight and build rather than retreat to safety and propriety. And that choice, made in grief and defiance and desperate hope, had led to this moment, this life, this love. It had led to everything that mattered, and she would not change a single thing.